front side of this, I want to give credit where credit's due. Through what I share with you this morning, I've borrowed words from a LifeSpring text to me, the poetry of Naria Wahid. You guys often hear me using that during centering time, or if you're my Facebook friends, you see it all the time. Listen to her scripture as I see it. Listen to her words. Walk into her poetry with me, and walk out with deeper understanding. Walk out with yourself. Please pray a prayer of her words and of mine. The rain in this room is low and thick and undressing my heart through the air. Stay soft, speak truth, be heard. Amen. So I have been reading and meditating and discerning on this text for weeks. Seriously, guys, for weeks. And yet, I did not start writing my sermon until after midnight last night. By the way, happy daylight savings. That is so not me. Sometimes it's koinonia, the last minute things. That is not me. And yet, I did not start writing my sermon until after midnight last night. I am someone who plans things out, who rehearses and makes notes in the margins. This procrastination isn't really me. I didn't procrastinate to look at the scripture as if I hadn't already. I didn't procrastinate because I hadn't studied or because I hadn't talked to prophetic people in my life. I had already created both music and art in response to what this scripture stirs in me, and yet I didn't get it started. It was because I was stuck. Not stuck as in not being able to make meaning of it, or stuck as in feeling unmoved by it, but I was rather stuck in what I was being moved toward, which was anger. I have been so angry lately. It was so heavy on my shoulders, and when I approached this scripture, I would get to verse 10, and when the cloud went away from over the tent, Miriam had become leprous, and I would shut down. I just couldn't get past it. I'll be honest, I've been drenched in anger for weeks, and it's uncomfortable, and it moves me to angry outbursts about things that really don't have much to do with where my issue comes from. Jamie is testimony to that. I trapped her in my car driving back from Walgreens this week and vented very high speed and very, very rambunctiously about not getting the lip gloss I wanted at Walgreens. True, Jamie? Yeah? I still don't have my lip gloss. I have been angry at the deaths in our world, in our country, in our backyards. Angry about my exhaustion as a full-time working mother of two very young children who never seems to feel like I get a moment for myself. Angry about the homophobia that keeps the people I love most in this world up crying at night. Angry that the people of color that I love are being surrounded by ignorance in places where everyone should have a right to feel empowered and safe. But this scripture, these passages, feel like a personal injustice to me as a helper, to me as a sister, to me as a lover, a singer, a poet, a woman. Miriam was all of those things too. She really only shows up in 3 stories throughout her life, and I see our kindred spirits connect in all of them. Miriam was a helper. In the beginning of Exodus, Miriam is written about for the first time. She's a 7-year-old girl. A 7-year-old girl who watched her mother hold mud in one hand and a woven basket in the other, and using nothing more than this and her own tears, she fashioned what was hoped was a safe harbor for her 3-month-old son to flee his death. Miriam watched her baby brother drift farther out of her sight. I imagine that she ran along the riverbank, watching and following and guarding and praying. And just as quickly as Miriam had let her brother leave her arms with dreams of the life he would find, she watched with both deep sorrow and great hope as Pharaoh's daughter lifted him from his ark, knowing that she had to let him go to survive, for him to survive, for her to survive. Wahid would say, grieve. Grieve so you can be free to feel something else. Miriam was a singer too. She found safety on the other side of the Reed Sea, and yet her and her people turned back for just a moment to see the once mighty, what seemed indestructible army of Egyptians be crushed by crashing waves. And Miriam, with great empathy for her people, and without a moment's hesitation, grabbed a tambourine and led the women in song, a song of victory and a song of deliverance. In her power and strength, she co-created this to remind her people of their newfound power and strength, and to inspire them to walk more confidently into the wilderness ahead of them. Wahid would say, I sang a God alive for you. Miriam, lastly, was a sister. In today's scripture, where Aaron and Miriam, who have been a powerful priest and a gifted prophetess, are found asking, has the Lord spoken only through Moses? Has he not spoken through us as well? God hears them and raises this question. He hears them raise that question, and no sooner does he summon them to the tent of meeting along with Moses. They are summoned after doubting how God speaks to them, how God speaks to their brother and to God's people wandering in the wilderness. I'm not sure if they asked that question, those questions, with their ego, although that seems to be how the writer interpreted it, or if they asked it in distress, if they genuinely wanted reassurance or recognition or guidance. God arrives in a pillar of cloud and stands in the door. As the author of Numbers would have you believe, God then informs Aaron and Miriam that they were out of place to speak to Moses as if he was an average prophet. He is special. He's set apart and knows God in a way Aaron and Miriam have never experienced. Though they may want to, they haven't. Then after God's anger was shared, the cloud dissipated and Miriam had become leprous, meaning she contracted a disease that leaves her with sick, pale skin, possible deformities, or nerve damage, or paralysis, and at its worst, death. And the cloud cleared, and she stood face to face with her co-conspirator, who had not a single blemish on his face. He, as a high priest, was familiar with what had happened next in their culture. He and Moses both begged for God to restore Miriam, to take away the pain and the shame and the isolation that came with the diagnosis of leprosy, but it remained intact. There was a cleansing ritual that may allow her to recover after as few as 7 days, but for the time she was sent into the wilderness alone in hopes to be able to return soon. Both of her brothers were left unharmed and unchanged, as written in Scripture. Did you hear that? That was the trigger for me Miriam contracted leprosy, while her brother, her accomplice, remained in camp unharmed. That right there makes me outraged. I have tried to explain this away, reasoning and rationalizing with myself. But tell me, church, how do you rationalize a God of punishment who bore a son of resurrection? Jesus healed the sick. He didn't banish them. Jesus loved those betrayed, and yet he also found love for the betrayers. Jesus resurrected the dead. He did not smite the murderers. So tell me, church, how do you rationalize a God of punishment? Miriam is a helper like me, and so I get how having leprosy and being shunned by everyone you spend your life helping must have felt like punishment to her. This is so hard for me because it's unfair. They both did the same crime, if that's what you'd call it, against their brother, but one of them is holding an unproportional amount of guilt and consequence. And as women, why are we so often the people holding that? Holding others' feelings, holding their consequences, their guilt, instead of unpacking our own? Why do we take care of others' needs instead of figuring out our own and moving in them? The truth is, I can't, and I wouldn't, encourage any of you to serve a God who doesn't move with equitable consequences and punishments for all. And beyond that, I refuse to serve a God who inflicts punishment as a means to teach a lesson. That is not my God. That is not my God. That is patriarchy. The kind of patriarchy that the writers of our Bible lived in. The kind of fear that swallowed them. Fear of lost power, of lost control, of lost self. That is not my God. Selective punishment is not how my God moves or loves or creates. Tell me, did God decide who died in the shooting a couple weeks ago? Did God give my friend, who we just buried this week, a brain tumor and let him die last week so his pregnant wife could go on caring for both of their children and their one yet to come? Not my God. Did God poison the residents of Flint? That's not the God I know. Because my God is a God of love, who mourns with compassion and with mercy. My God holds me where I am and moves with me where I go and fills me with love that transcends any hate or fear of this world. We, Koinonia, need to set a tone for how our God holds and moves and loves in this world. Tell me, how can we live and move in love and not in fear? Feel it, Koinonia. That thing you don't want to feel. Feel it and be free.